mighty and ferocious Glavenus, the brute wyvern with a sword for a tail. Glavenus is a favorite of mine, but I also know he's a big fan favorite in the rest of the community. Absolutely. As always, the instructions and the parts list for this model and its deviant, Hellblade Glavenus, are available under the second tier membership of my Patreon. All of my instruction packs come with a file that automatically builds a shopping cart of the pieces that you'll need to build this monster through the #1 LEGO resale website, bricklink.com. There will be some very slight differences between the physical model in the video and the final version that you see in the instructions. But as always, the version in the instructions is the best possible version of the model. This Glavenus model takes influence from the Monster Hunter Stories version, as well as the original concept art, both of which use a very, very light tan for the stomach, which I've stylized here with just white pieces. I used regular blue for the highlights, and I used a mint color for his eyes. This model has some of the most advanced shaping techniques and stability techniques I've used so far. This is all to ensure that he can still stand and be played with despite his heavy weight. Alright, so let's do a quick size comparison. Like usual, here is a random LEGO minifigure. If you have a little hunter, Glavenus is just the right size for your hunter to go up against him. For larger action figures, my stand-in, of course, is a random Bionicle, and next to it, a large action figure, he kind of could fit in for a Monster Hunter Stories type size. Usually, I also like to include a Rathalos in the size comparison, just so that we have a relative constant, another monster, and as you can see, he's about, the right size for Glavenus compared to Rathalos, and it might be fun to have these two go at each other. As you know, I also have Mizitsune and Astalos, both of which I've covered on the channel already, and they also have instructions on my Patreon, including instructions for Violet Mizitsune and Bolt Reaver Astalos. All things considered, it's very cool to see all three of these guys together, and they're all patiently waiting for when I eventually do Gammoth. Glavenus is covered in spikes, as you can see, and that makes playing with the model a little bit difficult. Where exactly do I hold him? But quickly you can see that he holds together pretty well when moved. All my models are designed for play in mind. The points of articulation are sturdy and deliberate to ensure he holds his pose as best he can while you play around with him for the most part. Now, unfortunately, in order to ensure stability and a level of detail and accuracy, he cannot hold his tail in his mouth with this model, like in the game. It would create too many gaps along the body if I were to go ahead and make that work, and I feel that it would just make it look sloppy. Actually, my previous model of Glavenus could do it, but he looked really sloppy, and I feel that it's just, you kind of have to compromise. Either it looks good, or he can hold his tail in his mouth, and I think I'd rather have him just look good. You can still do things with his tail, you can still swipe it left and right, and his head, of course, can bite. Strangely, this build was actually extremely easy for me to pull off, and it set a new standard of how my models should look in the future. Highly detailed, but sturdy, and playable. Since this Glavenus model, I've gone back and reworked all my models before I make instructions for them. I'm very satisfied with how Glavenus turned out, and I'm also satisfied in how Hellblade Glavenus looks in its digital glory. I did attempt to recolor Glavenus into an acidic Glavenus digitally, but ultimately I was very unhappy with the final result. LEGO does not provide the suitable colors to match acidic Glavenus' unique color scheme, at this time at least. And I only provide instructions for builds I feel actually do the game models justice. I only want to provide the highest possible quality for you guys. And now, for my thoughts on Glavenus in the actual games. When I first saw Glavenus in the first trailer for Monster Hunter Cross, I was actually not much of a fan. I thought he was, my exact wording, too frontier for me. It's funny because years later I would come to love Frontier's Obio Rogu, and Obio Rogu is almost like a prototype to what Glavenus was. He's also a dinosaur with a sword for a tail. His Japanese name is, I'm just going to pronounce it Dinobaldo, It's Dinobarudo, which seemed quite silly to me at the time, just as a name. It just seemed like a silly name. In the game, he also seemed really easy, and that's just because it was low-rank generations, and low-rank generations is just easy. And so Glavenus was sort of just like a snorefest for me, and I just didn't really care, until I got to Hellblade Glavenus. And that's where I learned to respect Glavenus in all of his glory. Iceborne seemed like a no-brainer for his inclusion. The hostile, Mesozoic-like landscape of Monster Hunter World felt it needed more dinosaurs, and an awesome Carnotaurus monster was perfect. Unfortunately, as many have pointed out, the actual map designs of World don't really do Glavenus justice. He was always quite cramped and crowded when in Generations he had these big open maps to be in. And whenever he does his spins in World, he usually ends up halfway into the ground, or half the time he's on slopes. The Fated Four are meant to be awe-inspiring, flashy monsters, and while it is cool at first to see Glavenus walking around in a cramped jungle, it isn't always as fun fighting him in the cramped jungle. At least in my opinion. I really would have liked to see Glavenus in Rise, but whatever. And actually, I would love if Glavenus was just a mainstay in the series, like if he was just in every game, like, you know, like Narg, Akuga, Tigrex, Rathalos, Cyanoger. I've really come to love Glavenus a lot. As always, the instructions for all the models you've seen today are on my Patreon, including the deviant, Hellblade Glavenus. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank everyone for the support that they've given me, especially since I've since transitioned and I've increased the price of the Patreon, and you're still all supporting me, so I really have to thank you guys. It means so much to me. I'm going to try and pump out this content as much as I can, because I know this is a big thing for all of you, and you really enjoy it. With that said, next time is a double feature again, because next time we'll be tackling 2 infamous Monster Hunter 3 editions with similar names. Baroth, the Brute Wyvern, and Barioth, the Flying Wyvern. So stay tuned for next time.